The doctor said if I had taken one more sip, I would not be alive to tell you this story. My name is Rachel Monroe, and 3 months ago, I sat at my own dinner table, in my own home, and drank poison poured by the woman my husband loved behind my back. I want to tell you exactly how it happened, not because I want your pity, but because somewhere out there, another woman is sitting across from someone who smiles at her while planning her end, and she doesn't even know it yet. I was 34 years old, married for 9 years to a man named Daniel Monroe. We had a house in Ohio with a crooked mailbox that Daniel kept promising to fix, 2 dogs, and a life I thought was, if not perfect, at least mine. I worked as a pediatric nurse. Long shifts, tired feet, but I loved coming home to the smell of Daniel's cooking, because he was the one who cooked, always had been, since the day we got married. I remember thinking, on the last ordinary night of my old life, that I was lucky. Isn't that something? You can be standing right at the edge of the worst moment of your life and still, somehow, feel lucky. It started small, the way these things always do. Daniel began working late, not once or twice, every week, sometimes 4 nights in a row. He'd come home smelling like a different cologne, one I didn't recognize, and when I asked, he'd laugh it off. "New guy in the office wears too much of it," he said. "Rubs off on everybody." I believed him. God help me, I believed him for months. It was my sister, Claire, who noticed first. She always saw things before I did, maybe because she wasn't in love with the man, maybe because love makes you blind in ways that terrify me now to think about. "Ratch," she said one night over coffee, "has Daniel introduced you to anyone new at his office? Anyone? Female?" I remember laughing, actually laughing. "Claire, he works with 15 people, half of them women. What is this about?" She hesitated. That hesitation should have told me everything. "I saw him," she said quietly, "at the Riverside Cafe with someone. They were sitting real close, Rachel, real close." I didn't want to hear it. I told her she was wrong, that she must have seen someone who looked like him, that Daniel couldn't. 9 years, 2 dogs, a crooked mailbox we were supposed to fix together this summer, we'd promised each other. But that night, lying next to him in the dark, listening to him breathe like nothing in the world was wrong, I felt something crack open in my chest. Quiet, small, but it was there. 2 weeks later, I met her. Her name was Vanessa Cole. Daniel brought her home for what he called a team dinner. 3 coworkers, drinks, nothing unusual, he said. But the moment she walked through my front door, something in me went cold. She was beautiful, I won't pretend otherwise. Dark hair, sharp eyes, a smile that never quite reached them. She shook my hand and said, "Rachel, I've heard so much about you," in a voice so sweet it made my skin crawl, though I couldn't have told you why at the time. I served dinner that night. I poured the wine myself. I didn't know that within a month. That same hand, smiling, gracious, so very kind, would be the one pouring something into my glass that was never meant for a woman like me to walk away from. The signs kept coming after that, one after another, small stones dropped into still water. Daniel's phone, which he'd always left face up on the counter, started disappearing into his pocket the second it buzzed. He started taking calls in the garage. He started saying, "Work trip," more than he ever had in 9 years of marriage. And then there was the night I found the earring. Small, gold, shaped like a teardrop, wedged between the cushions of our living room couch. Not mine. I held it in my palm for a long time before I said anything, turning it over, feeling something in me go very still and very quiet, the way the air goes still before a storm nobody's warned you about. When I finally asked Daniel about it, he didn't even flinch. "Probably Claire's," he said. "She was here last week." Claire doesn't wear gold. Claire has never worn gold in her life. I knew that. He knew that too, I think. He just didn't care enough to make the lie convincing. I started watching him then. Not obsessively, not at first, just paying attention, the way you do when something in your gut refuses to settle down. And the more I watched, the more Vanessa Cole's name kept surfacing. In texts he angled his phone away from. In the way he said her name too carefully, like a man choosing his footing on ice. I confronted him on a Tuesday. I remember it was raining, because the sound of it against the windows is stitched into my memory now, forever tied to what he said next. Rachel, it's not what you think. Isn't that always what they say? Not what you think. As if there were some other, gentler explanation for why your husband's coworker's earring was in your couch cushions, why his phone had become a locked box, why he'd started flinching every time you said her name. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not then. I just looked at him and asked very quietly, "Then tell me what it is." He couldn't. He looked at the floor instead, and that silence told me more than any confession ever could have. We didn't divorce. Not yet. I want you to understand why, because I've asked myself the same question 1,000 times since. I stayed because 9 years doesn't disappear in one rainy Tuesday conversation. Because I still loved the version of him that existed before all this, the one who used to leave notes in my lunch bag, the one who held my hand through my mother's funeral without letting go once. I told myself we could fix it. I told myself people make mistakes. I didn't know that the woman he was seeing had already decided I was the obstacle standing between her and the life she wanted. I didn't know that fixing it was never really on the table, not for her. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Daniel suggested we have Vanessa over again. To clear the air, he said. So there's no awkwardness. She feels terrible, Rachel, she really does. I should have said no. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to say no. But some foolish, hopeful part of me thought, maybe this is how we heal. Maybe seeing her, ordinary and human, and not the monster I'd built in my mind, would shrink the whole thing down to something manageable. So I said yes. I cooked that night chicken, roasted vegetables, the same recipe Daniel and I made on our first anniversary. Vanessa arrived with a bottle of wine, smiling that same sweet smile, apologizing so gracefully I almost believed her. "I feel awful, Rachel," she said, touching my arm. "Truly, I never meant for any of this to happen." I poured 3 glasses of wine that night. Mine, Daniel's, hers. At some point, she insisted on refilling them herself, waving me off with a laugh when I reached for the bottle. Sit, you cooked all night, let me do this." I remember the taste of my wine was slightly different that evening. Bitter, in a way I couldn't place. I told myself it was a different vintage. I told myself a lot of things that night, small lies I fed myself to keep the evening from feeling as wrong as it did. 20 minutes later, my hands started shaking. My vision blurred at the edges, the room tilting like a boat in rough water. I remember trying to say Daniel's name and hearing my own voice come out slurred, distant, like it belonged to someone else. The last thing I saw before everything went black was Vanessa's face. She wasn't panicking. She was watching me, calm, almost curious, like she was waiting to see exactly how long it would take. I woke up to the sound of machines beeping, and a light so white and sharp it felt like it was cutting into my skull. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. I didn't know why my throat felt like it had been scraped raw, or why there was a tube taped to the back of my hand, or why Claire's face was the first thing I saw, hovering over me, streaked with tears she wasn't bothering to wipe away anymore. "Rachel," she whispered. "Oh my God, Rachel, you're awake." I tried to speak. Nothing came out but a dry, broken sound. "Don't," she said quickly, pressing a hand to my shoulder. "Don't try to talk, you're okay. You're going to be okay." It took hours before I understood what had happened. The doctors said it plainly, in that careful, clinical way doctors use when they're trying not to frighten you further, even though the words themselves were terrifying enough. I had ingested a toxic substance, something used in pest control, of all things, something that should never, under any circumstance, end up in a wine glass. My body had gone into failure. My heart had stopped, briefly, in the ambulance. 60 seconds, the paramedic told Claire. 60 seconds where I simply wasn't here anymore. I don't remember the ambulance. I don't remember Daniel calling 911, screaming my name, the paramedic said, loud enough that neighbors came out onto their porches. I don't remember any of that. All I remember is Vanessa's face, still and calm, watching me fall apart across my own dinner table. When I told the detective that, when I said, she wasn't scared, she was watching me, I saw something shift in his expression. He wrote it down without saying much. But 3 days later, when the toxicology results came back conclusive, that single detail became the thread that unraveled everything. Vanessa Cole was arrested on a Thursday morning. I know this because Claire was the one who told me, sitting on the edge of my hospital bed, her voice shaking with something between relief and rage. "They found it in her car," Claire said. "The same brand, same chemical. She didn't even try to get rid of it, Rachel. She just left it there, like she never thought anyone would look." Some part of me wanted to feel triumphant hearing that. I didn't. I just felt tired, in a way that went deeper than sleep could ever fix. Daniel visited every day I was in the hospital. He sat by my bed with his head in his hands, saying my name over and over like an apology all on its own. "I didn't know," he kept saying. "Rachel, I swear to God, I didn't know she'd do something like this. I would never." "You brought her into our home," I said, the first real sentence I managed to get out clearly. My voice was hoarse but steady, steadier than I expected. "Twice." He didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't one to give. "I want to be honest with you about what happened over the following weeks, because this isn't a story where everything ties up in a neat, comforting bow. Recovery wasn't clean. My hands still shook for almost a month afterward, small tremors that would come out of nowhere, while I was making coffee, while I was folding laundry, and each time it dragged me straight back to that dinner table, to the taste of that wine, to the moment the room started tilting sideways. I went to therapy. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters. I didn't survive this by being strong and silent and stoic. I survived it by sitting in a small office twice a week, telling a woman named Dr. Whitfield things I hadn't even admitted to myself. That I'd known something was wrong for months and stayed anyway. That some small, quiet part of me still loved Daniel, even while I was furious enough to want to burn our whole house down. "That doesn't make you weak," she told me once. "It makes you human. Love doesn't leave the moment it's supposed to. That's exactly why it's dangerous." Daniel and I separated 3 weeks after I left the hospital. Not with shouting, not with slammed doors, with a quiet, exhausted conversation at our kitchen table, the same table where I had almost died. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I can." "I know," I said, and for the first time since that rainy Tuesday, I meant it completely. There was no fixing this. There was only surviving it and then, eventually, learning how to live again on the other side of it. He moved out in October. I kept the house, the crooked mailbox, the 2 dogs, the kitchen where I nearly lost my life. People asked me why I stayed there, why I didn't sell it and start somewhere clean, somewhere without ghosts. I understand the question. But I needed to prove something to myself, something that mattered more than I can fully explain, that this house, this life, wasn't hers to take from me. That she didn't get to poison one dinner and take everything else along with it. The trial happened in the spring. I sat in that courtroom and testified about the taste of the wine, the tilting room, the last thing I saw before the world went dark. Vanessa Cole did not look at me once, not the entire time. She stared straight ahead, composed, unreadable, the same calm mask she'd worn across my dinner table that night. The jury didn't take long. Attempted murder, 10 years. I didn't cry when the verdict was read. I thought I would. I'd imagined that moment for months, played it over and over in my head, certain it would feel like some kind of release. Instead, it just felt quiet. Final, like a door closing gently instead of slamming shut. Daniel wrote me a letter, months later after the divorce was finalized. I still have it, tucked in a drawer I rarely open. He apologized, genuinely, I believe, for the affair, for the blindness, for bringing danger into our home without ever seeing it coming. He said he thought about that night constantly, the sound of my voice breaking apart, the 60 seconds my heart simply gave up. I don't hate him anymore. I want to say that plainly because forgiveness surprised me more than anger ever did. I don't hate him, but I don't miss him either. There's a strange peace in that distance, one I didn't expect to find. It's been 8 months now since that dinner. I still cook in that same kitchen. Sometimes, pouring a glass of wine, my hand will hesitate over the glass for just a second, old fear, old memory, surfacing without permission. But then it passes, and I drink it anyway, slowly, on my own terms, in my own home, alive. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to me was losing my marriage. I know better now. The worst thing would have been losing myself, my voice, my instincts, the part of me that finally said enough, even after everything, even after nearly paying for it with my life. If you're sitting somewhere right now, sensing something is wrong, some quiet unease you keep talking yourself out of, please listen to it. I did eventually, just barely in time. And that's the whole story. Not the kind with a happy ending wrapped in a bow, but the kind that's true. I lived. I rebuilt. And every single day since, I've chosen on purpose to keep living fully, loudly on my own terms. Thank you for listening to my story.